Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. As I've mentioned on the last couple of shows, the live communism is officially done, the first part of which will be coming out March 2025. So definitely circle that in your calendars and set a reminder because the live begins March 2025. I've been trying to pump as many episodes out as possible before the end of the year and before March 2025. I've got a lot to get through. The last few shows I've done have been a loose trilogy. They've all centered around government overreach in a rapidly changing world where we've gone from the old analog systems to the digital. Pretty much all of them involve the internet and the digital age in one form or another, and involve governments either overreaching and overstepping in the terms of new laws and really their lack of foresight and lack of acting on any of the digital platforms, and really the lack of global governments failing to act when it comes to internet laws and censorship. I think that boat has sailed, and I think global governments are really struggling to keep up with pretty much everything we do in the modern day, going digital and online. The first one I did was freedom of speech, focusing on Canada's Bill C-63 and their Online Harms Act. The next one was Australia's digital ID systems, with the final part being the cashless society debate. Is that a conspiracy, or is it a product of a rapidly changing and digital world? If you haven't listened to them, I'd be very grateful if you gave them a listen. You probably won't find them on YouTube. You're definitely not going to find episode 61. We need to talk about Justin. That one was pulled off of YouTube for apparently containing medical misinformation. If you can't find that one on YouTube, you can listen to it on Spotify or Apple or any of the other podcast platforms. An episode I did a couple of months ago on the Boeing whistleblower deaths also got flagged for containing suicide references, which, no shit, one of the dudes apparently took his own life, which was all information I got from news sources. So there's an age restriction on that one as well, which is very funny because that one came out 5 months ago. It's been out for a long time. It's hardly had any views, and it's been fine up until last Wednesday. Guess I'm on the YouTube radar now. So one of my episodes has been pulled, so they're probably going to go back and try to find anything else in the previous ones. They're just a little slow at doing it. Alright, enough about that. I think it's time for another movie review. So on tonight's episode, we're going to be taking a break from conspiracies and current events and shit that gets you pulled off of YouTube, and returning to one of my favourite subjects, movies. In particular, one of my favourite film franchises, Alien. We'll be having a look at the latest installment in the Alien franchise, Alien Romulus. I wrote this review a couple of months ago in August when it came out. By the time this comes out, it's probably going to be a new year. It'll probably be 2025 by then. But either way, I wanted to cover it. I'm a big fan of the Alien franchise, as most of you probably are. Which of the original films do I find the better one, Alien or Aliens? They're both directed by great directors. I've been a huge fan of the franchise, going all the way back to when I first saw it when I was a kid. I can't remember the exact order I saw them in. I know for certain I saw Aliens first, and I'm pretty sure I saw Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, or I might have seen Aliens, Alien Resurrection, Alien 3, Alien. I'm pretty sure Alien was the last one I saw. Either way, they're fantastic films. They're one of my favourite franchises. So it was a nice surprise when I found out another Alien film was on the cards. I didn't even know there was another Alien film on the way. I heard about it back in March 2024, I'm pretty sure. I think my brother may have mentioned it. I didn't watch the trailer. I'm kind of over watching trailers. They give way too much away. I prefer to go into a movie blind now and not know the entire story. because you can always work out pretty much where the beginning, middle, and end of a film is now. Especially Marvel movies, they give everything away. They give all the big action set pieces away, like Spider-Man No Way Home. You knew that Statue of Liberty fight at night was going to be at the end of it. Even though they didn't give the other Spider-Man away, you kind of knew that that was going to be the end of it. And I really don't know why they have to spoil the movie in the trailer. It's like they've just got nothing else to say about it. There's no build-up. It's just a collage of all the best fast-paced action scenes into 2.5 minute trailer. It's very fucking annoying. They don't focus on the story, and that's the problem with modern day trailers, is there's less focus on the story and more focus on the effects and the action, and it's very difficult to try to work out what the story is actually about. So I avoided seeing any Alien Romulus related trailers. I wanted to go in blind until I saw what did I see? Wolverine, Deadpool and Wolverine, and they had an Alien Romulus trailer in that. I was a bit skeptical going in, especially when I heard that the story was going to focus on younger people encountering an alien. I thought, yeah, okay, here we go, just another reboot of a beloved franchise, stick a whole bunch of modern young people in it, make everything ultra diverse, slap the franchise name on it, and hope that it's good. Then I found out Fede Alvarez was directing it. I haven't seen any of his films, but my brother is a fan of his. He said, no, he's a pretty decent horror director. So I thought, okay, decent director. It does look good. It looks creepy. There's a big emphasis on practical effects. I heard that from somewhere before the film. That was going to cut down the special effects and go back to more of the practical old school effects, which I think work much better in the Alien films. It's much scarier. So I thought, okay, this could be good. It does look pretty good. It's dark. It has that cool red theme going through the posters with the face hugger on the woman's face. Everything's red, so it kind of sets itself out from the typical black and green. But I was a bit skeptical given the last Alien outing and Ridley Scott's disastrous attempts to try to reboot or rekindle the franchise that he started. And I could do an entire episode on Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Alien Covenant isn't the best film. It's got some decent action in it, but ultimately it's pretty lackluster. Does some very unforgivable things in it. One of the things I really did hate was David creating the aliens. I think the aliens are much scarier not knowing where they came from, or it was just some biological organism in the far reaches of space. I think that's much cooler than a psychotic android creating life because he has a god complex. David is the most interesting character in that series, but I just didn't like the playing God angle to it. I thought it really degraded the originals, especially what James Cameron did in Aliens. Prometheus, on the other hand, I like the ancient alien angle. I thought the engineers were the most interesting part of that story. I just wish there was more about the engineers. I think the alien comes into it a little late, but that movie's good as a standalone sci-fi film. As an alien film, it's very flawed and has a lot of problems. It's still enjoyable. I mean, as I just said, as a sci-fi action film, it is really fucking good. It's decent, but there are a lot of holes in it, especially when it is held up with the original Alien films. And I think a lot of that had to do with it really not having its own identity. I can't speak for Ridley Scott, but it doesn't look like it was really meant to be an Alien film. It was marketed as one, and I think they probably had to add a lot of shit before the film came out to try to make it more alien-y, because there isn't a hell of a lot of alien-esque stuff in it really until the final part of it. Really the only connection to Alien is the engineers, the space jockey and the ships, and that kind of did its own thing. There could have been 3 prequels before it even led into Alien, but the themes and concepts of it are pretty good. Who created humans? If humans had the technology and the ability, would they go find their creators? And why did the engineers want to destroy all life on Earth? The black goo is also interesting. It adds a new element. But ultimately, I think it does degrade the originals because that was used as the whole crux of David playing God and tampering in creating life was via the black goo. It was a bit too of a convenient plot. And, like I mentioned, I think it's much scarier not knowing where the alien came from. It would have been much cooler if it was just a random killer alien organism out there in the far reaches of space, and the engineers came into contact with it, or they used them for something, or they were studying them. I think that probably would have been a more logical pathway to go down. So going back to Alien and Aliens, there's always that old debate about Alien and Aliens. Which camp do you fall into? Are you an Alien fan or an Aliens fan? I mean, I'm a fan of both Ridley Scott and James Cameron. Ridley Scott's last few movies haven't been as good as his old ones. James Cameron, in my opinion, hasn't made a bad film. Whether you like Avatar or not, I'm a huge Avatar fan, as you're probably aware of by now, because I think I did, 2 or 3 episodes on it. I fall into the Aliens camp. I think that is the... Do I say better? That might be a bit blasphemy. It's the more entertaining film. I like both films. They're both vastly different. Aliens is the action sci-fi commando film, and Alien is a horror slasher film set in space. They're both very different. They both tie in perfectly to the franchise and to the Alien universe. Aliens is taken up a notch. It's the sequel on steroids. I love the colonial marines. I love that intensity in the action. All those classic characters like Hudson, Hicks, Frost, Newt, Gorman, Bishop, Vasquez, Drake. He's one of my favourite marines. Sergeant Apone. Everyone loves Apone. And who could forget everybody's favourite villainous, spineless corporate slug in Burke. And then obviously the sole survivor of Alien, Ripley, where the intensity with her is taken up to 10 in this one. She's a very different Ripley to the first one. Sigourney Weaver's performance in Aliens is outstanding. The intensity of her performance and that fight or flight motherly instinct she has in that film really set it apart from just another sci-fi action film. There's a very human element in all of that. Ripley's one of my favourite female leads in any film, and she is one of the best science fiction characters, or any character in any franchise or genre of film. That's one of the reasons that that film has withstood the test of time. It is as good today as it was in 1986. And a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Michael Biehn at a Supernova, where he said a similar thing. He said, like, the effects and the story, the acting, none of it is dated. You could release that film today and it would be just as good as it was in 1986. And I think he's right, because it's far better than half the shit that comes out these days. It's one of my go-to rainy day films, along with Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, Star Wars. If I have the choice of watching any of the Alien films, especially out of order, I always go for Aliens. I showed my partner Alien and Aliens, Prometheus and Covenant this year. She liked them. Aliens was her favourite as well. I guess they don't quite make films like that anymore. I fall into the Aliens camp. I think what James Cameron did with the sequel, he took that idea and just upped the ante. He also created the Hive and the Queen and the Warrior drone aliens. The Xenomorph in Alien is much scarier. The Xenomorphs in Aliens are pretty much just cannon fodder. But I think that's a cool element. The Marines are this badass fighting force. They have all this state-of-the-art equipment. It puts the humans on a level playing field, makes them a bit more capable. Obviously the first one, they're pretty much miners, so they don't have any weapons or armor or anything. And who doesn't love that scene when they go into the nest and they start to get picked off one by one, and then they can't use the pulse rifles, and then all hell breaks loose. And then those badass Marines aren't quite so badass without the guns and ammo, and then it pretty much turns into a survival film for the second half. And it's just a well-paced film as well. I prefer the director's cut. It's like 2.5 hours, yet it feels like it's an hour and a half. It's not boring at all. Everything just keeps going along, and it's nearly an hour before you get any real action in it, or even see the aliens for the first time. Alien's the same thing. It's about an hour into it before the alien is even born. But the alien in Alien is much scarier. It's more of a threat. It also has the more unique, classic Xenomorph shape with the smooth head. Cameron's philosophy behind that was that after a certain amount of time, and the older the Xenomorph got, that part dried out. revealing the spiky, Geiger-esque front of the head. The original Xeno with the skull behind the black smooth head is a bit freaky. I think it looks a bit too humanish. I'm not sure if I like that as much. Where Cameron's aliens are a bit more, I think, distinct. They camouflage into the wall better. Either way, both designs work, whether you like the smooth head or the more textured spiky head. Both designs work. They're both equally as scary. Both have withstood the test of time, and it's probably one of the most iconic cinematic monsters of all time. So that's a very long-winded way of saying this episode is going to be on Alien Romulus. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's show. This is episode 65 of the Truth Tank, Alien Romulus review.
We are the Brutal, Bizarre, and Boozy podcast. I'm Declan, the son.
And I'm Jane, the mom. This is the podcast where we talk about brutal crimes like serial killers and the random one-off murder. We will tell you about bizarre occurrences like alien abductions and monsters in the dark. And we just might get you drunk with cocktails themed around one of our stories.
At the very end of every show, we like to lighten things up and cleanse the palate from the tragic and terrifying stories. So we end our time with a chaser. You might get to hear crazy stories about our pets or just silly movie recommendations.
Give us a listen. We are the Brutal, Bizarre, and Boozy podcast.
So it goes without saying, this episode will contain spoilers. If you haven't seen Alien Romulus and you would like to, I would probably skip the rest of this. Let's get into the review. You've been warned. As soon as the lights went down and the Fox logo appears on the screen, we are dropped back into the glorious, gritty, and gory world of Alien. The opening credits are interesting, to say the least, but they do a very good job of establishing a timeline for the film. Alien Romulus takes place between Alien and Aliens, and it becomes pretty apparent very early on during the opening credit sequence that it takes place after the events of Alien. It's about 10 years after Alien, I think. I might be wrong on that, but the opening credits are pretty cool. It drops you straight back into this world where a probe finds the wreckage of the Nostromo. Now, I was a little surprised by this. As I said before, I tried to really stay away from it, and this wasn't an element that was put into the trailers, and I didn't really read a synopsis on the story. So I wanted to be surprised going in. The probe makes its way through the wreckage where we find what looks like a lump of space coal. It's a disgusting looking giant black rock floating through space, which is collected and brought down to a group of very mysterious, nefarious looking scientists, where they bring out a laser to extract whatever is inside. Weyland-Yutani is the corporation in question, the mysterious, kind of the antagonist of the Alien franchise. They find this lump of rock and are trying to extract whatever is inside. Now, if you have seen the Alien films, you'd be well aware that they are pretty much the bad guy. They always have some ulterior motive for investigating or trying to get whatever commodity. In previous films, they've tried to use the alien for the bio-warfare division. Burke is a classic example in Aliens where he tries to bring back a live specimen of the Xeno by infecting members of the Marines or any of the colonists that were left behind. The very sus android played by Ian Holm, who does an excellent job of hiding his intentions for pretty much half the film. He has orders to bring back a specimen of the Xeno. And going right through the Alien films, Weyland-Yutani always has some ulterior motive and is willing to sacrifice people's lives to get a living specimen of the Xeno. I can't quite remember what their intention was in Alien 3. I haven't seen that in a very long time. I just remember them popping up at the end because they want the Queen in Ripley. I don't think they're mentioned in Resurrection, but they do play a big part in Prometheus. Obviously, it being Weyland's ship they used to go on the mission. So from there, we are introduced to Jackson Star, a mining colony that has humans working on it to mine resources for Weyland-Yutani. I did really love these scenes on Jackson's star. We don't get a lot of planets in the Alien franchise, apart from obviously LV-426 and the one from Prometheus. When I first saw the trailer, I thought, is this Earth? Are they going to finally let us see what happened to Earth in the year, whatever it was, 22, whatever? So I was starting to get excited we might actually get to see Earth, but no, it was just a mining colony. And there's a very obvious combining of elements from the original Alien franchise and a very direct tip of the cap to Alien references, much the same way Rogue One did with elements of the original Star Wars trilogy and the sequels. They're a very good comparison, these two films. Alien Romulus pretty much is Alien's version of Rogue One, combining elements with a new story and characters. And Jackson's Star has this very gritty, realistic retro feel. And going back to Rogue One, they do the same thing where they bring back the old retro tech from the original Star Wars. Romulus, everything feels like it's from the 80s. All the computers and all the technology feels very future retro. They have very old school computers and switches and layouts of ships. It's gloriously retro, but at the same time it is very cool and retains that alien-esque feel. In the opening 10 to 15 minutes, there's a lot of nods to the original Alien franchise. They tick a lot of nostalgic boxes. The planet rains a lot. It's grimy and oily and artificial and very corporate. It's very cold. And it gives us a very grim and grimy future, which could be very likely to happen if corporations don't get some limitations placed on their power. Corporations will take over the fucking planet if you let them. And Jackson's Star is where we're introduced to the new cast. One of my favourites being Andy. Andy is a second-hand, thrown-away android with a few software problems. This is made very obvious from the first time you meet him. He gets jumped by a bunch of kids. He starts freaking out and he has the white blood dripping from his head. So we get the introduction to the new characters. Rain, played by Carly Sapney. Andy, played by David Johnson. Tyler, by Archie Renault. Kay, Isabella McCreed, however you pronounce it. Bjorn, Spike Ferrin, and Navarro, Aileen Wu. I also love the build-up around Weyland-Yutani. There was a big focus on the corporation in this, where in previous films it's been kind of like a third subplot or just mentioned. I think the corporation is only referred to as the corporation in Alien, and it doesn't get referred to as Weyland-Yutani until Aliens. And even then it's not really referenced a hell of a lot. So I did really appreciate a big emphasis on the Weyland-Yutani corporation. There's another cool scene where a bunch of miners are heading off to work, and they have a canary in a birdcage, the old canary in a coal mine, a bit of a throwback, which I thought was cool. In all the advances of technology, biological life forms are still superior. There's also a past connection here with real-life mining on planet Earth back in the 19th century, and even today it's a very dangerous industry. One of the things mentioned, obviously the canary in the coal mine, so there's a chance of miners getting gassed by fumes. But the big problem on Jackson's Star is sickness. People get sick from whatever they're mining. The corporation doesn't care or provide them with enough PPE, which still happens today. The Congo, this plays out on a daily basis, where poor people work for these giant international mining companies who can't be fucked providing them with respirators or gloves or any of the PPE necessary to do the job. They're mining cobalt and lithium and these other rare earth minerals for the Western world's consumer products and rechargeable renewable energies, mainly elements for lithium batteries. And this is a direct correlation with the Jackson Star. The problems of the past are the problems of the future still, especially when it comes to corporations not giving a fuck about their employees. The other thing highlighted is life expectancy is very short. The miners don't live very long. They usually die from these seasonal illnesses and diseases they get via the working conditions. The miners are just numbers to the corporation. They do not give a fuck about them. And Weyland-Yutani comes off like this faceless organisation, as a lot of modern day companies do. It's very reminiscent of the first one. I loved all those grimy, gritty, corporate greed and cuntiness elements that they've just cooked up and dropped into the first 10 to 15 minutes of the film. It really does put you straight back into the world of Alien. And this is a world that we haven't seen in a very long time, excluding Prometheus and Covenant, because they kind of do their own thing. It's been a very long time since a retro Alien film has been on the big screen. So we get a nice introduction to the new characters. The younger characters weren't as bad as I first thought they were going to be. Rain works for the corporation. Her father died as a result of the illnesses. Andy was found in a rubbish dump because it was cheaper for the company to throw away all the older model synthetics and replace them with new ones rather than give them software and hardware updates to make them work better. Her father finds Andy, reprograms him to be a companion for Rain. There's a cool scene where she thinks she has done her a lot of time because on Jackson Star in the mining colonies, you work for the company, you work off your hours or something like that. You get food and accommodation and stuff, but you have to work it off, and then you get your piss poor pay at the end of the week. So she goes to the office and is hoping to check out. She's done her contracted years of time. In other words, time's been served, and she thinks that she can cash in and then go home. When she gets to the office, she's found out that the corporation has raised all the hours because they need more resources, or for some reason, I can't really remember what. But they've changed the deal. She has to work another so many years, which forces her to change her plans. And this is where ultimately the whole backbone of the story comes from. She has a plan to fly off-world and fly to the derelict Romulus space station hovering above Jackson Star. And unfortunately, I think this is the first plot hole, because this giant space station is pretty much orbiting Jackson Star. We obviously know Weyland-Yutani is controlling this planet, star, whatever it is, and has a lot of resources there. So why haven't they gone to investigate the Romulus space station? Why haven't they made it a quarantine zone, or why haven't they gone in there and done an investigation? But a group of young people are going to take a shuttle from the planet, take off without anybody saying anything, fly to the space station in order to get in there and get the hypersleep pods and plot a course for this paradise world. Rain has heard of this planet that's supposed to be a utopia, which is another recurring theme in the Alien franchises, especially Prometheus and Covenant. She's heard about this planet and she wants to use the hypersleep pods from the Romulus space station in order to do that. So about 5 of them get a shuttle, they come up with this plan, and they're going to go salvage what they can from the space station. So the plan is to take one of the mining haulers, take it out into space and investigate the space station. I can't remember which character it is, but one of them discovers a signal from the space station. The hauler picks up the Romulus's signal, so that's how they know it's in space. So the hauler picks up the signal of the Romulus space station, which again goes back to one of the first big plot holes. Is if one of the mining haulers, which is presumably owned by Weyland-Yutani, picks up the signal of the Romulus space station, why did no one else on Jackson Star know about the Romulus, especially Weyland-Yutani? I'm assuming they would have had interests there. They would have known the whereabouts of the space station. Stands to reason that someone else, apart from these pretty much 5 or 6 young people, would have picked up the signal as well. But either way, that just gets in the way of a good story. Yeah, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense because other people would have picked up the signal as well. And these haulers are just randomly lined up and parked in a row with the miners walking up and down kind of a street. People kind of camp around these ships. Another element I liked is the planet's very dark, like the other planets we've seen in Alien. There's not very many sunny landscapes in the Alien franchise. It's all very dark and gloomy. This kind of fits with the future of mining in space and that dark, corporate, faceless, suspicious corporation that is pulling the strings behind the scenes. And I think space mining will be a real industry in the not too distant future. I think we'll be mining asteroids before we know it. And why not? It's an untapped resource of precious metals and rare earth minerals. Rather than dig up our own planet, we can mine asteroids. And isn't that a win-win? you mine the asteroid, you make it less of a threat that it's going to hit Earth or another planet and wipe out all life. So I think the plan was to get cryofuel from the cryopods in order to put themselves to sleep for the journey to this mysterious paradise planet, or something like that. I can't really remember. It's been a while since I've seen it. Another element I really liked was this slow burn tension. Fede Alvarez does a really good job of building the tension of this film, much the same way Alien and Aliens did. It takes its time building a story, getting you invested in the characters, and just building that tension because you know something's going to happen. You know an alien is going to appear in this film. You just don't know when or where. And it does a very good job of drawing it out. It's not in a boring way either, or a tedious modern way where some directors try to copy the original and there's no soul to it. There's nothing new. It's very boring and mundane, and they're just doing that because that's the style of the original films. Where Fede Alvarez definitely is a master of building this tension. So I really liked how it just sucks you in and keeps you wanting more. It keeps you guessing and bringing you further into the story. And there's some very creepy things that happen when they do reach the station. So before they take off and head out on their quest, they're sitting in a future retro room discussing the plan. I think Andy is playing a game. It's like a facehugger shooting game, and I'm pretty sure that was an 80s Aliens video game that he's playing. Someone's like shooting facehuggers, like similar to Space Invaders. The other thing I liked was the watches are very much like the ones from Aliens. But this time it's got like a hologram or something that pops up on it. But it's more or less a pretty similar style of watch to the one that Sigourney Weaver uses in Aliens. So, fast forward a bit, the young crew arrive on the derelict Romulus space station in search of cryofuel. Now, the second problem I have with this is there's a lot of facehuggers in this film. And we know from Aliens that the Queen produces them, she lays the eggs, or if you want to go with Covenant, David's been making them. But either way, there's a lot of fucking facehuggers. The problem I have is how did they get there? Why is there so many of them? And the real big problem is what is making them, because you don't really see any eggs in this film. That's not a huge spoiler either, because you don't see many in the trailer. The facehuggers are like in Ziploc bags in a lab on the Romulus. I had to look this up after the film, and it turns out I'm pretty sure the scientists on the Romulus were making them artificially. So this kind of goes back to that bioweapon angle. Again, not the biggest fan of that. I would have preferred them to be laid organically. It's cool on the one hand that the scientists are making them, but on the other hand, it also brings up a whole new set of questions. And that's the problem is when I did see it, I was thinking, did I miss something? Like, did I nod off for like a minute in the film? Was this explained and I just didn't pay any attention to it? Because they go into a room, they got to turn the power on, which activates the room full of facehuggers, and they start getting out of the bags. I was thinking, where the fuck did they come from? They just walk into a room full of facehuggers. However, I did really appreciate the practical effects of the facehuggers. This is very reminiscent of Aliens, and it is very creepy, especially when you see them crawling on boxes or around corners or something. And that's another element that this film really does get right. It blends modern visual effects with practical effects and does it really, really well. And there seems to be a bit of a trend in films like this, blending of modern and past elements of movie making, especially in some of the Star Wars sequels where you've got a use of practical effects and costumes, but CGI backgrounds and ships and stuff. I think it's a nice balance to have, especially in modern filmmaking where there is an over-reliance on visual effects today. And once again, I'll go back to the Marvel films. They do a really good job of using lots of special effects. They're very good. But you can always tell something is kind of a visual effect. It has a style to it. So the use of practical effects was definitely a plus for this film, especially if you're a fan of the originals and you're used to seeing more so practical effects over computer-generated effects. Because there wasn't really a hell of a lot of computer-generated effects in Alien or Aliens. The later installments obviously have more computer-generated effects. And that was one of the biggest fucking downfalls of Prometheus and Covenant, is that there was too much computer-generated effects, especially in Covenant. The alien is not scary. pretty much all the scenes involving the Xenomorph or Xenomorphs in Covenant are computer generated, and they're not scary. They look computer generated. Prometheus, same thing. Yeah, the engineers might be an actor in a suit, but most of the Xeno and trilobite sequences all were special effects. So it was nice that they went back to actually making an alien as a animatronic character rather than just the visual effects and green screen. It's also much scarier for the actors, and that does really play in this film. So our band of young misfits are exploring the halls of the Romulus, and this just keeps sucking you deeper into the story. There's some cool shots of dark, futuristic space station corridors that kind of suck you in. It's very reminiscent of the Alien Isolation game, and it helps build this tension and anticipation that something is going to pop out of a fucking wall or an air duct or from around the corner and scare the shit out of you. Andy and a few of the others are in the creepy red power room, and the others make their way to the research station, where it looks like a battle between a Xeno has taken place. There's acid damage everywhere. There's a giant hole in the floor. There's a hole in the roof and what looks to be a torn apart synthetic lying on the floor. They take the little CD SIM cardy thing out of the synthetic and give Andy an upgrade, which is another cool element. The synthetics have like a port in their neck where like a disk drive or card drive of some type pops out. Andy gets the long-awaited upgrade that he's been waiting on. And Andy's a unique character because he starts off as kind of this lovable idiot younger brother character. Then he gets this upgrade and becomes a slightly more sinister character. And the more upgrades he gets in this, the more his personality changes. And David Johnson does a fucking fantastic job of bringing to life all these different personality changes with him. And it would have been a really hard job to do. Much the same way Fassbender, David, was such a great character, and then in Covenant, Arthur comes along and he's this polar opposite. This is kind of a similar thing, but it's all contained in the one character. So over the course of the film, you're like, which Andy is going to show up? Is he going to try to help, or is he going to be the cold-hearted corporate android that he got the disk drive from? Andy is the most interesting character, and it just adds another layer of tension and anticipation onto a film that's already full of it. He just keeps you guessing, and he keeps you watching him the entire film because you just don't know what he's going to do or what he's even capable of. Is he going to go left? Is he going to go right? Is he going to help, or is he going to hinder? And as I said, it's another layer of tension. Besides the xenomorphs and all the other external dangers, you have this internal threat from a member of the crew. Or is he a threat? And that's the great thing about this film, is it just keeps you guessing. So Andy gets this upgrade. The tension starts to go up. The two guys in the power room get stuck. The door is jammed. They can't get out, which makes the girls on the hauler have to come onto the ship. Because you had Andy and Tyler and Bjorn go to the power room. Navarra and Kay are on the hauler. Navarra's the pilot, I'm pretty sure. Kay's pregnant. She has morning sickness, so she's in bed. I can't remember where Rain is. I think Rain and Andy make their way to the research lab. I think Andy goes to the power room to help the other two a bit later on. But Navarra joins Rain in the research lab. And this is where we get the first Xeno-related action where the facehuggers break out of the bags and start attacking everybody. There's a cool mix of effects. There's the facehuggers going in the water of this power room. They start attacking people. They attack the two guys in the power room. Andy's gone down to open the door with Rain. One of the facehuggers attacks Navarra, and we kind of all know what that leads to. There's a cool chase through the corridors with some facehuggers. These are more CG facehuggers. They're chasing the people back to the research lab before the doors closed. It's a very cool and intense scene. Back in the research lab, we find out that the pulled apart synthetic in the corner is actually an Ash-looking android, which was a cool retro nod back to the original Alien. Ash makes a comeback, and this is very similar to Rogue One, where they use the latest motion capture and visual effects to bring back an original Star Wars character in Grand Moff Tarkin. The actor that played him had died a few decades ago, and it's a cool way of bringing back a fan favourite. And this is a similar thing. They used Ian Holmes' likeness to bring him back via motion capture. It's not quite perfect. Some scenes are really good, and others you can tell they're just not quite right. The mouth doesn't move quite the right way, and you get that uncanny valley kind of feel. Your brain's saying, yeah, there's something wrong with this. It looks like a human, but it's not quite perfect. Other scenes look really good. So the Ash this time around is called Rook. He is a science android working in the research department of the Romulus. First time we see Rook come back to life and start talking, the effects are a bit dodgy, but fortunately this picks up over the course of the film. I love the design of the research station. I love all the old computers and the retro design of it. All the old retro hardware is blended perfectly with modern technological elements, so it retains that old 80s Alien feel, but has a few modern upgrades like holograms and stuff like that, and more up-to-date technology. The facehuggers are on the loose, and Navarra ends up wearing one to the face, and we all know what happens after that. And this is where Rook fills in the backstory about what happened to the Romulus and about what the thing is on her face, because they want to try to cut it off, and he explains this will kill her, it's breathing for her, there's some great practical effects. The breathing on the facehuggers this time looks really fucking cool. They did a good job in the originals, but these ones just look like they're real facehuggers. It's very creepy. There's a cool PR campaign they did in Times Square. You should look it up online, where they had a bunch of actors lying around with facehuggers on their faces. It looked very creepy. It would have scared the shit out of a lot of people. So Rook fills in the backstory to the Romulus' demise and what took place. He explains there's two parts to the space station, the Romulus and the Remus. And if you know your history, that obviously relates to ancient Rome, Romulus and Remus, the twins that are suckled by the she-wolf and go to war with each other. Obviously, Romulus was the victor who establishes the city of Rome. I like this element. I think the Romulus and the Remus would have both made good prequels. There's some security vision that they view of the Xeno attacking the crew. Rook explains there's no survivors on the station. Everyone was killed during the attack. He goes on to fill in the blanks about the acid damage in the research lab. And he explains that the OG Xenomorph from Alien was not in fact dead, as we all thought. And that was the thing that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation was after in the opening credits. The alien was encased in this black resin stuff, which also wasn't that well explained, and I had to look this up afterwards. Apparently a defense mechanism of the Xeno, it secretes the resin like they use to make the hives in order to protect itself in space. Go figure. Which would also mean the alien queen in Aliens could still be alive and might make an appearance in future sequels. If an alien warrior can do that, then the queen certainly can as well. Which, once again, I don't know how I feel about this, because, how tough are they? They get blown apart by pulse rifles en masse in Aliens, but the Xeno, I should say, in Alien, gets shot with a grappling gun, blown out of an airlock, incinerated by the ship's thrusters, and is lost out in space. So how fucking tough are these things? I'm not sure I like that element of Romulus. I thought maybe going with another alien would have been a better choice, but I didn't write or direct it, so I can't complain. Rook outlines what happens at the station and explains that the security forces did battle with the original Xeno that has found itself tangled up in wires and melted through the roof of the research station, which has consequently burnt a hole through the floor going right down to the bottom level like previous Alien films. Yeah, it's kind of cool they brought the original Alien back, but at the same time it seems unnecessary. They could have gone a different route and come up with any number of storylines to explain why there was an alien there. They didn't have to rely solely on the original one. Because once again, how tough can the alien possibly be? When we've seen them being blown apart by pulse rifles, shotguns, and even handguns in Aliens. So Navarra has a facehugger attached to her face. Bjorn grabs her, I think, and heads back to the ship. Everyone starts panicking, and Andy goes full-on corporate synth. So Andy's the perfect passive-aggressive protagonist. You just don't know what Andy you're going to get at what stage in the movie. And having him be upgraded this far into the movie was a stroke of genius. and having his upgrade come from Rook, because it allows the writers to play with him being a good guy, a bad guy, a good guy, a bad guy, then all being completely neutral. Navarra's been infected. She's got the facehugger. They make their way back to the ship. Facehugger comes off, and just like previous Alien films, you think everything is okay until she starts having convulsions, and bang, the chest burster breaks out of her in all its gory glory in front of Bjorn and Kay. So it scrambles off and finds a place to transform, like the original Alien, which causes a big dramatic event in the hauler and causes it to crash into the space station, which is actually pretty cool. This has some really great action that takes place in space, on ships and in space stations, where some of the other Alien films have either been isolated to either a ship, a planet, a compound, or something like that. Never really in space, unless you want to count Resurrection, which I do not. So the hauler crashes into the hangar, it damages the station, the alien is on the loose, which starts a chain reaction in the Romulus space station, which knocks it out of alignment. So you got one crew member dead, an alien on the loose, an untrusting android, the hauler crash, and now the space station is on a collision course with an asteroid belt, just when things couldn't get more dramatic. There's 47 minutes until it crashes into the belt, and we haven't even seen the alien yet. It's a pretty decent way into the film before the Xenomorph is finally revealed. Bjorn goes trying to find it in the bowels of the hauler. He tracks it to a dark, warm corridor somewhere where he finds this massive egg sac, this disgusting, giant, gooey alien vagina thing, for lack of a better word. And this is the first time we've actually seen an alien gestate from a chest burster to a fully grown Xenomorph. He takes a cattle prod thing, tries to zap it. It damages it, which absorbs the electricity. So this alien stands out. It's got electricity going through its head, which again, I didn't really like. I thought that was unnecessary. It's scary enough to have an alien with electric shocks going through its head. I thought it was a bit unnecessary. They're adding an element such as electricity to the alien, so it's taking an artificial energy form or whatever, and it's incorporating it into its biology, which it's showing how resilient it is, but ultimately I thought it didn't really need it. The alien's scary enough. These are a bunch of teenagers without any weapons. So this brings us to the very graphic Vadpodge on the wall birthing scene. It's very slimy and pretty disgusting. Bjorn tries to kill the creature. Unfortunately, that doesn't work out too well for him. He gets covered in acid. It's a pretty graphic scene of him, of his hands and stuff burning and melting away, which he gets quite a lot of acid dumped on him, but it doesn't seem to do as much damage as you think. The damage to the ship is a lot more from one alien, and this is kind of a similar situation. It does a lot of damage to ships and metal, but not quite as much to people. So two of the crew are dead. Kay heads for the hangar where the hauler crashed. She makes a run for the door, only to find it being guarded by none other than Andy. There's a lot of atmosphere and suspense in this part, and this is pretty much what the film has been building to so far. It's been building the excitement and the intensity for the big reveal of the alien. So Kay's headed through the hangar, only to be pursued by the Xeno. And once again, you don't really get a sense that you know what's going to happen to this character like other movies. She's pregnant, so is she going to get killed? Is she not going to get killed? This far into the movie, after she has survived everything else pretty much. And Andy knows this as well. He knows that she's pregnant and still won't open the door because the risk is too high. There's a cool scene where she's hiding, where the alien's above her in this, walking on a metal grate she can see through. It's a very creepy scene. But it disappears. She makes her way to the door, and the confrontation with Andy ensues. Andy knows what's about to happen. He has plenty of time to save her, but won't compromise the safety of everybody left, especially Ray's safety. He's been sworn to protect her. So the intensity is ramping up. Characters are dropping like flies. And I did like the pacing of that. I did like how they deliberately waited till later in the film to bring the alien into it and start killing people off, because you can't really develop characters and then killed them off 20 minutes later. I liked how they gave everybody as much screen time as possible. So Rain and co. head for the Remus laboratory, which is where all the experimental and scientific stuff takes place. One thing I wasn't expecting to find in this film, when our heroes make their way to the Remus lab, they find an old experiment that was being worked on using Promethean fire. And I liked how they tied in Prometheus and Alien Covenant back into the traditional Alien timeline. And it made a lot of sense. I actually thought it was a pretty good addition to the story. And much like Rogue One, they're blending elements from the originals and the prequels. And it actually worked. It explains a lot of things. The company is interested in Promethean fire because they think they can cure some of the seasonal diseases that pop up every year by using it, by genetically modifying the workers' DNA or something like that. There's tests on animals going on. Rook explains to them why the company is interested in the Xenomorph. And it wasn't for biological weapons like it has been in previous films. It was trying to study its DNA to find out what makes it so resilient and so tough, and can they use this for their own corporate needs or something along those lines. Rourke also fills us in on the engineers, the purpose of the Promethean fire, where it came from, and the experiments that were taking place on a rat. And just like his synthetic predecessor David, Rourke is the one that figures out how to use the Promethean fire. He's the one that figures out how it works, what its purposes are, and some of the pros and cons. Like it can have some unexpected mutations and go a bit haywire. He also proves the point that the synthetics are company men to the end, and unfortunately we still don't really know why Weyland-Yutani wants it. Rourke explains that it might trigger a accelerated evolution in biological beings, because natural evolution is far too slow at adapting to adversity, especially the demands of space. There's a company side of it where they want an accelerated evolution so humans can do better in the hostile environments of space. That was kind of cool. I mean, you could have made your own movie out of just that storyline. And unfortunately, I think it comes at a point in the film where everything is ramping up, so there's a lot more subplot and subtext that's being chucked into the film. But unfortunately, we're kind of running out of running time, and there's a lot of new ideas coming into it at a very intense moment in the film. So you don't really have time to stop and think about it before the next big action set piece. So they're trapped in the lab. The alien is trying to get in. And this is where we get our first look at the brand new civilian model pulse rifle, which was really fucking cool. Not as good as the Colonial Marines pulse rifle. I think that's one of the coolest guns in any movie ever. But it was still cool nonetheless. And now it gives our human characters a fighting chance, because none of this stuff is on the Romulus side. That seems to be very civilian-based research. The Remus side is more of a kind of corporate, cold military type of feel to it. But obviously the security guys had to be fighting the alien with something. The gun is pretty cool, but just not quite enough. And unfortunately, the alien around this point does start to get lost in the script, because as I just outlined, there's a hell of a lot happening right around this moment. We're getting introduced to the black goo, the Promethean fire, the company wanting to use it for accelerated evolution. There's aliens trying to break into the door. People have been killed. Rain's trying to figure all this shit out, and everything's happening all at the same time. And I think there may be one too many subplots happening, which is a bit of a shame because it is a very cool idea. I just think maybe if it was either earlier in the film or a bit more stretched out, it might be a bit more easier to take in. So they grab the black goo, and now it's time to escape. And this brings us to about 10 minutes until the space station collides with the asteroid belt. So that little subplot ties perfectly into Prometheus and Alien Covenant. It works in the context of Alien and Aliens, but I don't think it's developed enough, and it seems like a little bit more explanation probably wouldn't have gone astray. We're just getting introduced to another subplot, and now we've got 10 minutes until impact, and now the film turns into Aliens. And that's the biggest criticism I have with this film, is it starts off as Alien and then more or less ends as Aliens. When we get to the lab scene, we actually find out that The Remus side of the space station is infested with aliens. The facehuggers had impregnated the crew, which in turn turned into xenomorphs. We see more bags of facehuggers that have all been burst open. How many people were on the space station, we don't actually ever find out. The main character, Rain, at this point, turns into Ripley, and even her costume changes to the more stereotypical aliens costume. She's got Converse All-Stars on, which is a throwback to Alien and a lot of other sci-fi films. It's good to see that Converse All-Stars are still going strong 200 years in the future. She's got the grey singlet on, which I think has appeared in pretty much every Alien film. Ripley or the other female lead has worn a grey tank top. Alien Covenant, Daniels wears a grey tank top. Sigourney Weaver has one in Aliens, and I'm pretty sure Alien 3. She has the white one in Alien. I don't know if this was a deliberate thing, but it seems likely that it probably was. It's a little nod of the cap to Aliens now. And that's the problem, is I think there's just a little too much fan service and too many nostalgic things thrown in there to appease Alien fans. I think the story gets lost here. It could have been a lot better. It just seems like it started Alien and now it's going to tip the cap and be more of an homage to Aliens. I mean, it is cool, but it's a bit unfortunate because I was expecting a bit more of an original ending, especially from this renowned horror director. It's still a good movie. I just thought there was a bit too much fan service around here. This leads to the elevator scene. We find out the way to the elevator is paved by a hive, but there's no queen because nothing's laying eggs. All the facehuggers are made by the scientists pretty much from the DNA of the original Xenomorph, which was cool, but at the same time I think if they had a good way to tie that back into Aliens would have been maybe a Weyland-Yutani science vessel comes across LV-426 and the crashed derelict ship, gets a couple of facehuggers and they take it back to the space station, things go sideways and all hell breaks loose. But ultimately I didn't write it, so there's a big shootout in the elevator. Rain starts blowing away aliens with the pulse rifle because it's a civilian model and it has auto aiming or aim assist. So she starts firing away and killing aliens, which is a bit annoying because the alien takes a long time to come into the film. You don't get to see much of it. It's very threatening and scary. Then they go to the lab, and all of a sudden it turns into aliens, and there's a dozen aliens now, and Rain is blowing them away. Tyler disappears into an air shaft, I think a few moments before this, and is killed by a couple of aliens. That is kind of really the turning point where you realise that, oh, wait, there's not one alien, there's like 10. So Andy's personality switches again. He's more or less back to normal and trying to save Kay. Rain's running out of ammo. She's trying to wait for the elevator. There always seems to be an elevator in Aliens films as well. I mean, that's obviously the big finale of Aliens, waiting for the elevator before the Queen arrives. And this is a similar thing with the station's about to crash into the asteroid belt. The same way the facility on LV-426 is going to go into a nuclear meltdown. Or the climax of Alien, where then the Nostromo goes into self-destruct. And unfortunately, the alien isn't really as scary as we first see it around this point because he's pretty much been taken out by a group of kids and a stun stick, and now they're getting blown away by a pulse rifle. There's too much blending of past films at this point. It's Alien and Aliens and Prometheus and a bit of Alien Covenant, which is unfortunate because this film started off very originally. It had its nods to the originals. It did the fan service and paid respect to the past films. I just can't help but think it might have been a little more original, maybe a little better if it had its own identity and hadn't have blended elements of all of the previous films, just to kind of give the fans what they wanted. You can give the fans what they want, but you can still be original, which it was. It just, I think it might have been a bit scarier with the one alien, but then again, is that too much of a copy of Alien? And if you put too many aliens in it, then it's too much of a copy of Aliens. So you're a bit damned if you do, damned if you don't. You can't really appease both fan groups because Alien and Aliens fans are one and the same, but each Alien fan has their own favourite alien or aliens. Like I said at the beginning of the show, they usually fall into one of either two camps. This film is a bit of a victim of that. It's trying too hard to appease both factions of the fan base. And you know what? This is also the first Alien film that is technically made by Disney, and it wasn't as woke or as cringeworthy as I was expecting it to be. It was a lot more brutal and violent, which does give me hope that future films are going to be good and not regurgitated shit aimed at kids. I saw recently in a collector's shop somewhere those children's Disney books, but an Alien one, and they made the Alien look all cutesy they had the cat and Ripley. I was thinking, oh, for fuck's sake, they'll be doing a Predator one next. But, you know, the Predator doesn't rip people's spines out, he has tea with them. It's the kind of shit that I was expecting to see from Disney, and I guess on the one hand, it was a refreshing surprise that it was more brutal than I was expecting. The first act is very much more original, has its own identity. The second act dials up the intensity and the excitement, and the third act dials up more of the fan service. And look, some of that works. I did love the tying together of the original Alien films, Prometheus and Alien Covenant. I just thought that probably could have come into it a bit earlier because it was a subplot and a theme or concept that required a bit more explanation, because you don't get much time to think about it before the next big action set piece takes place. There's a lot going on in that section of the film, and I think it might just be a bit too much. And going back to that lab scene, when they're explaining how the pulse rifle works, there's a bit of a homage of the Hicks and Ripley scene, where Hicks is explaining to Ripley how the pulse rifle works. Tyler explains to Rain how it works. He knows about the guns because he's read about them. Now that I think of it, Rain and Ripley, two stronger female characters that both start with R, maybe not as original as they probably could have been. There's a pretty cool scene involving Rain blowing away the aliens while she's waiting for the elevator. There's a cool scene where they turn the anti-gravity systems on the ship, which makes all the aliens go up in the air along with all the blood that is splattering everywhere. That was actually pretty cool. Kay is found in the hive. She's in bad shape. Rain uses the black goo on her, which fits nicely into the lab scene and the connection back to Prometheus. I just feel there's a lot of build-up to the alien first appearing, and then as soon as it appears, it's pretty much pushed aside in favour of more of a tribute to aliens, which is a little annoying because it's a pretty decent amount into the film before the alien is seen, and then it's kind of just pushed aside in favour of more aliens and some black goo. And it looked like the hive had been there for a while, so why didn't the sensors pick up on more than one alien, like the sensors from Aliens? And it seemed that Rook would have known that, or maybe he was hiding it, I can't remember. If the hive had been there all that time, it seems a bit pointless building the anticipation for the reveal of one Xenomorph when the other side of the space station was pretty much full of them. They could have just walked in there and found more than one alien. I think that probably would have worked, rather than kind of luring the audience into believing that this was just going to be one alien, have that alien pop up, be a big threat, make their way to the lab, only to find out that now there's actually a dozen of them. I think it would have been scarier if there was probably a few more, or they just did what Alien did and just have the one Xeno, because there were a bunch of defenseless kids pretty much. It would have been a bit more believable, and if they got picked off one by one, but I think the switching back and forth from Alien to Aliens really does hurt this film. I think it probably would have been better if they just had have stuck with either or, Alien or Aliens. I think the fans would have liked it either way. In the hive, we find the rest of the workers cocooned on the walls, but there's not a hell of a lot of screen time in the hive or for the numerous aliens that we see. They're more or less just cannon fodder by this point, and they pop up, chase, Rain, get shot. I think more of a corporate plot would have been better too. Like, you know, who the workers were, why do they need the alien, what is the purposes of extracting the DNA besides the benefit of workers, because I don't think anyone who is into alien films really believes that Weyland-Yutani has the people's best interests at heart. Going back to what I was saying about now there's heaps of Xenos, it just seems like they kind of bring in a bunch of Xenomorphs for the sole purpose of blowing them away on screen. because they don't really serve much of a threat as the first Xeno you see, the one with the electricity going through its head. So now we get the cool elevator scene. This is one of the highlights of the second half. Yes, it's very nostalgic and a bit of a takeoff from Aliens, but it still works. It's still very intense. Rain has to climb up the elevator shaft where the alien decides to play catch with her, where she's climbing up the elevator shaft, only to be confronted by old Electricity Face himself. She jumps or falls or something, only to be caught by the Xenomorph. There's a cool face-off scene, which I think is in every single Alien film. The face-off with the human with the mouth coming out. It looks like old Electricity Face has finally found her, and it's lights out for Rain until she is saved by Andy, who has now gone back to old Andy. So Andy's to the rescue. He jumps on it or knocks it off the wall and pretty much rides it down until it hits the ground and then blows it away and says, get away from her, you bitch, which I thought was pretty piss weak. I think that works much better with the female character, and no one said it quite like Ripley. It'd be like saying I'll be back or hasta la vista baby and it not being said by Arnold Schwarzenegger. It just doesn't have the same impact. So I thought that was a bit weak. So the aliens are dead, and now it's time to make their way back to the hauler where they can get off the ship. The only problem is Rook is trying to manipulate everybody into fulfilling the company's wishes. He is a cold-hearted prick, and he is trying to stop the space station from being blown up. So they make it back to the hauler. Rain puts Kay in the pod. She's pretty injured. And now we kind of get this generic alien ending by this point. It's become a bit formulaic. The surviving characters make their way back to a ship. They put themselves in cryo sleep. They think they can rest and relax, only to find out that a new threat is just around the corner. And the surprise is the black goo has mutated Kay's baby. There's another very gory birthing scene involving the birth of the abomination. It grows up incredibly fast. It's kind of like a retarded, evil engineer looking thing. There's a cross between the engineer and the weird newborn from Alien Resurrection. So at this point, they're basically covering all of the Alien films in the franchise. There's a little nod to pretty much every one of them, except for maybe Alien 3. I think it would have been better if it was old Electricity Face, if he had survived or another alien had made its way onto the ship, because this is kind of like the ending to Aliens, where the Queen Alien stows aboard the dropship. So this leads to a game of cat and mouse in the bowels of the hauler before the ship or the station, I can't remember which, crashes into the asteroid belt. The slow crashing station is pretty epic. It's a very cool visual. Ray drops the mining box into the asteroid belt containing the abomination inside, which is a bit too much like Alien Covenant. Another cliche of the Alien films is they tend to end with the alien being sucked out into an airlock. Some type of big, over-the-top alien having a final showdown with the hero, which has happened in a few of the films. So the abomination is being dealt with. Rain and Andy head to the utopian planet they always plan to go to, where she promises to fix him up after he has been hurt in the fight with the abomination, which concludes the film. All in all, I would give Alien Romulus 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a very good Alien film, even if it is a little cliche and it does switch from Alien to Aliens. It's very nostalgic. Lots of fan boxes are ticked. There's probably one too many subplots and it's a bit uneven in parts. I did love the retro future fashions in it. I'm pretty sure one of the characters wears Reebok pumps, which is a throwback to Aliens. There's the Converse All-Stars, which haven't changed in 200 plus years. It's good to see my sneaker collection will still be relevant in 200 years. Cargo pants and flight jackets are still in fashion. So I should still be in fashion in 200 years' time. That makes up a lot of my wardrobe. Leather bomber jackets and flight-style jackets, cargo pants, jeans, sneakers, boots. Romulus also does a very good job of setting up a sequel, because at the end of this film I definitely wanted more. It was a very gory and glorious return to the world of Alien, and if they can make more films like this, I think it will satisfy fans and could potentially even open another chapter of the Alien franchise. And now the connection has been made between Prometheus and Alien Covenant. The possibility of making another Alien film and tying off Ridley Scott's ideas with Prometheus and Covenant can work in the current timeline of Alien. I did really like that they connected Prometheus and Covenant back to Romulus. Even if it did need a bit more explanation, I think it's a good thing. It presents a whole new story arc and story possibilities, and it can tie in those films and characters into the current Alien timeline, especially everyone's favourite, David. If they can bring David and Andy into the next one, I think that would be really fucking cool. The only problem is you kind of have to fuck off the story with David creating the alien. I think that needs to just be fucking wiped from the record because it's did so much damage to the original Alien. It's confusing, and I think it's very dumb, and I really don't understand why Ridley Scott went down that path and not the biological path. Yes, I get it if he's upset that James Cameron made the more successful and, in my opinion, better film, if that's not too blasphemous to say. Ridley was pissed that no one made a sequel to his ideas, like about the derelict ship and the space jockey. Well, Ridley, you had plenty of time. You could have made it after Alien, but you didn't. You can't blame other directors like James Cameron for coming up with another story that fits into the Alien world, even if they don't use your ideas. Because what James Cameron did, I think he came up with a very reasonable, logical, and biological explanation to the alien. If they come from eggs, something has to lay the eggs. He was into nature and biology and the insect world and put two and two together. So in that regard, he does answer a lot of questions that Ridley left open. Ridley could have made his own film. He could have made a sequel, but he didn't. And you can't come along, 40-something years later and rewrite the history book, which he has now destabilised future films, which is hence why they probably had to go a bit more retro and nostalgic because of the damage done in Covenant. That wasn't a very well-received film. I don't think it's a particularly good alien film. It's an okay sci-fi action film, but it does come up short in many places. And the fact that they're willing to take some of those ideas on board and try to explain them a bit better rather than just wipe them from the record shows a lot of thought and respect to previous Alien films on the filmmaker's part, rather than just write them off and start again because they're too hard to deal with like some films do. So it does set up sequels, even prequels. I got a few questions. One, the facehuggers. How did they make the facehuggers? I mean, wouldn't they just make another alien out of the alien DNA? How did they figure out that the facehugger comes before the alien? It would have been a bit more easier to explain if they had a queen or something like that, or found some eggs. But, hey, it's still a good movie. I did also like the timeline setting it in between Alien and Aliens and not Covenant and Alien. So it's setting it into the classic timeline of Alien. I think that works much better than trying to do a prequel. And it's good to know the Promethean goo is still unstable. So that concludes the review part of the podcast, and this brings us to the thoughts and questions section of the podcast. Romulus left me with a lot of thoughts and questions, which I'm going to go into now. So first up, the artwork on the Romulus station has a bit of a hidden meaning. Pretty sure the Romulus artwork means bringer of death, which in hindsight is a bit of a prediction to what was going to happen at the station. I also like the ancient mythology angle, which the Alien films are full of, especially Prometheus and Covenant. The story of Prometheus being the obvious one, man's quest for meaning and to find his creator, and the age-old question of who created the creator, and if man can create artificial life, would they therefore seek meaning and or the ability to create their own creations, which is touched upon in the brilliant opening scene of Alien Covenant. I think that's the best scene in the film, where Wayland is explaining to David who and what he is, and more or less outlines humans created androids because they could. This obviously has an effect on David. He starts him on this pathological quest to create life, even though he is an artificial life form. And this brings up the very mind-bending question, if we could do the same thing, would we? And if someone created us, what would be the reaction if we found out that they created us just because they could? Would that take the whole meaning out of existence? Does it make existence meaningless, or does it add to it? Because how would we feel if we found out that our creators made us because they could? And obviously that depends on what you believe, but it's a very interesting concept to think about. And I don't think this really is that much of a controversial topic, even if you are very religious, because I think this is like a chicken and egg scenario. It can just go on and on and on. I often think about humanity's origins. Where did we come from? What is our purpose? Why do we do the things we do? Why do we look like we do? The age-old question, what is the meaning of life, is still a very relevant one, and I don't think anyone will ever have the answer to it. I often do think about, what if we are the creation of aliens? What if extraterrestrials created us in their image? Or like the old stories of the Anunnaki, they created us as a slave species to mine gold for them. It all depends on what you believe, I guess. But I do often think, who made us? Why did they make us? Did they make us because they could? And if we did ever encounter our makers, how would we react? What would be their reaction? How would we accept an answer, they just made us because they could? How would that make us feel as a species? These are all very interesting and dramatic questions. And that would also bring up the other question is, if we were made by a creator or somebody who made the creator and who made the creator's creator, who made the creator's creator, where does it start and where does it end? I think I could ramble about that all day, so let's move on. I did like the mythological aspect of Romulus and all the Alien films. I just think it needed more of it, especially in Romulus. It would have been nice to look into it a bit more. The other observation is you can't really have an Alien movie without a compression suit scene or an airlock scene, and Romulus has both, which has become pretty much a stock standard cliche of the Alien franchise. One thing I did really love about and appreciate about Romulus was the use of practical effects. They were really nice, especially in modern films where there's such a over-reliance on visual effects and computer-generated imagery. Covenant being the prime example, the alien just isn't scary, it doesn't feel alive because it's pretty much all special effects, which was really annoying. So the back to basics approach of Romulus was really nice. There might have even been some scenes with guys in suits like the original Alien, and this is something I think I'd like to see in any future sequel, because I think the Alien was like a animatronic puppet, which looked cool. It could obviously be bigger and scarier. But I think I would like to see a guy in a suit, or maybe even a puppet or something, going even further back into basics and seeing what you can do with modern suit technology. That could be really cool. Or a combination of animatronics and some type of advanced suit, puppet, whatever. The other theme I really appreciated about Romulus was the emphasis on corporate greed. Everyone is a number and an expendable asset. They're basically a pawn on the company chessboard. They don't give a shit about humans or their employees. And this is a theme that goes right through the Alien franchise, going back to Alien. And the Alien films do a very good job of hiding this faceless corporation. Because when you think about it, Burke is really the only face of corporate evil in the franchise besides Weyland himself. And I don't think Weyland is really evil. I think he's ambitious. He probably hasn't thought through all of his ambitious plans. I think he's one of those guys, he's got a lot of money and resources, and he wants to answer any question that kind of comes into his head, which is more or less the backbone of the prequels, where the company is more nefarious. They want the Xenomorph for bioweapons or for medical research or whatever. I also like that Romulus definitely has a defined and clear vision compared to Prometheus and Covenant. Even though it does lack its own identity, it has more of an idea of what direction it wants to go in. Prometheus being the prime example of a film that doesn't really know what it wants to be. Is it a standalone sci-fi film, or is it an alien film, or a mash-up combination of the both? Kind of no one really knows. I think the big downfall of Romulus is that it's half alien and half aliens. I think if it had more thought, it could probably be its own series. It could have just done its own thing and maybe been a bit more original in some parts. And speaking about cliches in the Alien franchise, It'd be great if the next film had a male survivor instead of a female one. That's the whole thing with films now. You have to have that role reversal. It's the very woke thing to do, to have the female lead. Where Alien was kind of always ahead of its time, it always favoured the female hero. So it would be cool if they had a male hero. Might have been a bit more original. If you want to see real diversity, you have to shake things up, because they've had a female survivor in the entire series, excluding David because he's a robot. I did love the production and costume design of Romulus. Retro future fashions, parkas, sneakers, grey undergarments, video watches with sweatbands. I love that seamless blend of digital and analog technology. I think in some real world cases, analog technology works much better than digital. There's pros to everything. We're finding out as a society the hard way about the transition to everything being digital. It's caused a lot of issues globally, and that's one thing I really appreciated about the film. Is I love the old computers and monitors on the ships and in the stations. It had a really cool futuristic, nostalgic vibe to it, much the same way Star Wars did and Star Trek. It also makes sense in Alien, because if you have these giant mining vehicles or military vehicles like the Hauler, the dropship, and even the Nostromo, I think in the Nostromo's case, having more of an analog computer system is probably not a bad thing, because you want to control the systems of the ship. You don't really need to have a high-tech Mac kind of interface to activate the thrusters, pull the landing gear up, or make the ship go forward or back. And I think it's probably a bit more of a fail-safe too, to have analog computers that can do all the controlling and programming of the ship internally, and that way it's not hackable or susceptible to outside factors like a high-tech modern computer system where there's an over-reliance on having everything online and connected to the internet. I think some things work better purely analog, and that does make sense in the ship design in Romulus and all the Alien films. Is you don't really need to have a high-tech computer that's connected to the internet to make the ship go up into space. Maybe it's safer and more reliable if it's analog, because I've had a lot of problems with modern computer systems. I'm sure a lot of listeners have too. Imagine if your iOS or your Microsoft update didn't work in space, you'd be absolutely fucked. You definitely wouldn't want anything to go wrong in space, because you get one shot at it, especially if your survival is tied to a computer. You definitely wouldn't want corrupted software. So I think it's probably more reliable to have some parts of a ship run off an analog system like Mother, hence the older style hardware, which can be explained in the timeline of Alien. You can say, well, it's 200 years in the future, why don't they have LCD touchscreens? One, they might be too expensive, and two, they might be unreliable. So that covers that base. Then you could have the digital systems, which might not be as rugged, but they look better and are faster and work better. Like the computers and the big hologram thing they have in Prometheus. That's obviously Weyland's personal ship, which has had no expense spared on it. And this is a similar thing we see in heavy machinery and industry on Earth. Cargo ships don't always have the most advanced looking systems. When you compare that to like a private yacht or a ocean liner, it's a very big difference. So I did love the combination of old and new, or as I like to call it, Digilog technology. And I did like the nod of the cap to the original films and what time period those films were made in. It's kind of like Star Wars and Star Trek. Especially when you go back and look at the original Star Trek that was made in the 60s. They had to predict what technology would be like. And that film, the original Star Trek, still holds up today. I've actually just finished watching that a couple of weeks ago. It was a bit hard to get into the first probably 8 or so episodes, but after that you kind of accept, this was made over 50 years ago. This is the technology they had, and you kind of just watch it for the story. Then you kind of get used to the old-fashioned nature of it, and then you start to appreciate it more. Another thing I actually liked is they refer to the alien as XX-21, Xenomorph, which is the first time they've actually given more of an official name to it. Xenomorph has been used before, obviously, but not XX-21, which I did like. And the themes of the Alien franchise are repeated in Romulus, and I think the big obvious theme of Alien. It's a metaphor for survival and rape in space rape in a way. And this is in both the Xenomorph and the company in their own way. The forced impregnation of an alien embryo into a host and the corporate greed of Weyland-Yutani. They do not care about their employees or the damage they do. They just want the resources and they're prepared to do whatever it takes to get it. The company also colonizes different worlds. So it's taking that metaphor and expansionism to an interstellar level. One thing I'd love to see in an upcoming Alien film is Planet Earth. What does it look like? How's it doing in the future? It's obviously not good. It's referenced a few times. What would be really cool for a future story is if a Xenomorph made it to Earth and spread chaos. That could be a really cool story arc if they had an alien invasion. Not so much like an Independence Day style invasion, but what if the Xenomorphs made their way to Earth and spread and took over a whole area? That would be really cool. You could bring the Marines back into it. Maybe Fox needs to give me a call so I can give them some story ideas. But I think at least one Alien film needs to incorporate Earth into a decent percentage of the film, even if it starts on Earth or ends on Earth. And I don't count the Alien Resurrection Director's Cut because that doesn't really explain a hell of a lot. Another element that would be really cool that I touched upon earlier would be the return of David and maybe even Daniels. I think David needs to return for one last appearance to round out that trilogy. I think Fassbender would do a great job. Maybe him and Andy can have a face-off. It'd also be interesting to see how they tie David playing God and creating the Xenomorphs from Covenant into the more updated timeline and how they can get around that. Maybe there could be a better explanation to the origin of the Xenomorph, or maybe they could do what they probably should have always done and just leave it mysterious, because I hate when films over-explain everything. Another theme that I really liked about Romulus, which plays out through all of the Alien films going right back to the first one, is the dangers of AI. Artificial intelligence plays a big part in the Alien universe. Androids are artificial intelligence on a nightmarish level. Ash is the perfect example of that. Everything about him just says there is something wrong and something off about him. When he tries to kill Ripley, he's trying to fight that programming but also be faithful to the company. And just imagine if megacorporations had their own army of AI androids, it'd be a truly terrifying future. Especially those companies that don't have any morals and don't give a shit about poisoning people or destroying the environment. Imagine if they had artificial intelligence, henchmen, bodyguards, and yes men that are completely loyal to the company and will do whatever they're instructed to do without thinking about it. That would be fucking terrifying. And the AI aspect plays out in various scenarios in the Alien franchise. Bishop is a good guy. He's like the perfect version of artificial intelligence. He wouldn't harm a fly. Call in Resurrection, not so obvious as the previous androids. David is obviously the scariest one. Andy is this balance in between the two. He's not overly aggressive or murderous like Ash or David, but when he gets that upgrade, he turns into a very sus character. We have megacorporations and companies on planet Earth. Could Apple, Tesla, or Amazon be like Weyland-Yutani in the future? Or some yet-to-be-known company? Could a company like Weyland-Yutani take over the whole world? I'd say yes. I'd think it's a very real possibility that one singular company could become so powerful it could buy up multiple companies in different industries and become like Umbrella in Resident Evil. That's a very real threat, I think. And I think we really need to see more of Weyland-Yutani in future films, or maybe even in a spin-off TV series or film. And I think a company that big would definitely get into space mining in the future, which might be pretty cool. And that's a very real problem in the modern world, are companies that just have unchecked power and influence. There's plenty of them that are influencing governments right around the world. It's mind-boggling and amazing all at the same time that single companies have so much power. Look at the rise of Amazon in just 20-something years. It becomes one of the biggest companies on the planet. I'm not saying they do anything nefarious or anything, but imagine if you had a company that size that doesn't mind blurring the lines between good and evil, moral and amoral, and doesn't care about stepping on their own employees. Thinking about Alien sequels, I think it was David Lynch who proposed Alien 3 be set in a space zoo, which turned into basically a Xenomorph zoo, which I think would have been really cool. There's a level like that on Alien Isolation, I'm pretty sure. I think Lynch's idea was to have a xenomorphs infect animals in zoos and have a whole bunch of different looking xenomorph creatures. That would have been pretty cool. You could sell a lot more toys that way. But I think the only problem with the Alien franchise now, there's just too many themes running through it. There's so many different avenues to go in, largely thanks to Prometheus and Covenant, and there's multiple possibilities. There's a TV show coming, which should be interesting. They've kind of gone away, I feel, from James Cameron's kind of storyline of it being a biological species. I was hoping they were going to bring the Alien King into it. I think that would have been cool. It would have explained a lot. And now this new element from Prometheus with the Promethean fire and genetic tampering has come along. So they have to combine these different elements. So hopefully there can be a bit more balance between the different and conflicting ideas because they're all good. It's a very exciting franchise, and now that this is the first sequel kind of prequel, it's sequel to Alien, prequel to Aliens in a way. And now that this is that first sequel prequel to fit into the original timeline, that really has come up with a coherent timeline. It should be much easier to fit all the elements from Prometheus, Alien, and mix them up and fit them into a story that makes sense. Prometheus, as I mentioned, is a good film in its own right. As an Alien film, not so good, doesn't quite work. The biggest problem with Prometheus is it just fucked the whole timeline up. It shook things up too much, and now we don't have the mystery behind the Xenomorph anymore. David's creating aliens. I think that concept is just stupid. It just takes all the mystery and wonder out of the alien. If some robot is just making his own alien life, that's kind of cool. That definitely works in a standalone sci-fi film. In the world of Alien, I think it's much scarier if it's just some nightmare species from the far corners of space somewhere. I'm not a big fan of the alien origin coming from an android. And I think Ridley must have been high if he thought that idea was one, good, and two, Alien fans were going to like it. So if you take Prometheus and Covenant out of the timeline, it would be much easier to follow. However, Alien Romulus does a very good job at fitting all of the puzzle pieces of the previous films into one coherent timeline and universe, which incorporates elements of the prequels like Promethean Fire, as well as all the elements that fans loved about Alien and Aliens. And I think the one big issue with the Promethean Fire, although it is a cool concept and a very cool idea, it could go the other way and be very bad and be overused or used to create more pale abomination retard creatures, for the lack of a better word. Because some of the designs for the Promethean Fire creatures are truly atrocious. I hated the Abomination. It's almost as bad as the Newborn from Resurrection and that white albino alien Xenomorph from Covenant. I fucking hated that thing. Just cut that out and just go back to fucking Xenomorphs rather than coming up with all these new creatures. The Xenomorph is plenty scary and has been proven time and time again to work. And maybe the sequels need to focus on some more original ideas. Romulus is a great way to rekindle the fire of the franchise and tie everything together and kick off another original chapter in the Alien universe. And hopefully the new TV show adds to this timeline. I do wonder about the Promethean Fire though. I wonder if that was a purely creative decision that tied all the Alien elements together, or if this did come from Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott does serve as a producer, so I wonder, did he insist on including an idea that came from him from the prequels, and was that a way of him having one last inclusion of his film into the new franchise? Maybe even a bit of a fuck you that you're going to use this idea as a way of including and having his prequels make one last glorious contribution to the Alien franchise, because it has to stick with the continuity he decided to ruin in the prequels. Another positive for the film, the music was very good. However, I'm not sure the score of Prometheus needed to be in the scene with the Promethean fire, because I think if you're an Alien fan, you probably understand what that's about. I think there are some elements from the prequels that need to be looked at again and even closed off, one of which would be David all alone on that gigantic fucking ship with all those colonists and alien embryos. What is he doing? Is he going to make a Xeno army? That could be an interesting storyline the sequels could look at. Another element that hasn't really been looked at, and this goes back to the Romulus artwork on the ship doors and the seals of the space station, is what is with all the mythological and religious and occult symbolism in Weyland-Yutani. That's an element that could go down as well. Is he just obsessed with mythology and the big questions that religion proposes? Or is there a more nefarious reason why mythology and occultism plays a part in Weyland-Yutani? And is the Xenomorph connected to this in any way? I think that could be an interesting storyline to go down. Does that also play into the company motto? They're all about the numbers. They don't care about people. You have to work your hours off. But no matter how much you work or how many hours are chased, it will never be enough to satisfy the corporate mentality or their greed. And if you want to get really weird on it, you could even say that, are they sacrificing their own employees to some mysterious demonic space entity in order for monetary gain or corporate power? Because it seems anyone that comes in contact with Weyland-Yutani is more or less just an expendable asset. Everyone is a number serving the company, more or less like it is today. I think Alien does a great job of incorporating all those kind of elements into this nightmarish future. They're some of my favourite aspects of the Alien franchise, and how it ties corporate greed, human nature, survival, an unknown organism that happens to be the most perfect killing machine in the known universe, biology, technology, and ties it all together in this gloriously dark and gritty, grimy and gory, futuristic world that is very grounded in reality. There's not one part of Alien that does feel that over the top. Everything feels like this could potentially happen in the future. The other elements I really love are the clear metaphors on the dangers of artificial intelligence. Androids. Androids are a terrifying physical embodiment of the most frightening aspects of artificial intelligence. And obviously the other one I love was corporate greed, and how these mega corporations will end up literally taking over the planet and the known universe if you let them. And I would love to see a rounding out of all the elements and themes of Alien and Prometheus. And one element the Alien franchise needs is we need to see Michael Fassbender make a return. Even if it's just for one last time, I think there needs to be a definite conclusion to the David storyline. Even though I'm not a fan of him playing God and being the creator of the Xenomorph, I think he needs to have one last hurrah and be included in a future sequel. And I think that theme of him playing God and the devil at the same time is a very interesting theme that really does fit in with Romulus and the direction that the franchise is going in, which ties into Weyland-Yutani and the company, their insatiable greed and messing with things humans really shouldn't be, like trying to profit from highly dangerous extraterrestrial species from the far depths of space. And that concludes our look at Alien Romulus and the themes and questions of the Alien franchise.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Turn your dial to find the frequency of the past.
Captain Advice.
Where the classic stories of mysteries, sci-fi, thrillers, and suspense are found waiting to be heard once again.
Another case for Nick Carter, Master Detective.
You'll find a variety of those stories here, in their original form, where each episode takes you to another place or time.
The Man of Bronze, Doc Savage.
But only when you find the mystery frequency. Available everywhere.
The shadow knows.
And that brings us to the end of the show. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. Live Communism grows ever closer. Part 1 releases March 2025. Definitely mark that in your calendar. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like, share them around. You can listen and download your favourite episodes of the Truth Tank on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube if they don't decide to pull every other episode down, Castbox, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts if it's still around. It might still be on Podbean, Rumble, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Make sure you subscribe to the Truth Tank on your preferred podcast player to get all the latest updates and episodes. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help share it around and spread the word. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review on your preferred podcast platform. Every review helps get the show found and helps it rise through the ranks. You can also share episode updates on Instagram and Facebook. Alright, that brings us to the end of the show. I'll be back in the next couple of weeks with a brand new episode. Live Communism comes out in March 2025. But until then, I'm a Tank. This is the truth. Truth to tell.